Hi, it's Lou from Christian Faith and Fiction. Today I'm going to share with you some books that I've read recently, mostly Christian fiction books, and there's kind of multitude of different genres. So I film these as I'm going along. So as you're going through, if you find a book that you've already read, please do share your thoughts about it in the comments below, and also your favourite book that you've read recently. Okay, let's go see how I got on. I just finished listening to While the City Sleeps by Elizabeth Camden. This is the first book in her new series, The Women of Midtown, and it is set in 1915 New York. It's following Catherine, who is a female dentist, quite unusual for the time, and she is working at this clinic in the sort of late shift, so she finishes about midnight, I think it was, but in the night. And for 2 years, this police officer, Jonathan, has been walking her home at night on his break in his night shift that he does for the police. And then one night, these two men come in asking to have a tooth removed. Whilst under the influence of the anaesthetic, the laughing gas that she's given them for that procedure, one of them reveals something that is to do with something that's happened, and I don't want to reveal too much by spoiling it, but something that's happened, and it involves a crime, and Catherine gets put in a position where she's then in danger. So this almost reads like a contemporary romantic suspense novel at times. There's police procedural things, although obviously for 1915, and there is the romance and there is suspense elements as well. There is some violence in there as well. We're following Catherine as she is moving around the city and looking at where she's living, looking at the past of both characters, particularly Jonathan's past. So there's a lot going on in that book, and there was a lot that I really enjoyed about it. I enjoyed the sort of the crime side of it, and I enjoyed the romance and all the different characters and the setting of it in that sort of time period in New York. There is some faith content in there. The characters are Christians. One of them is Catholic, I think. The other one is Protestant. Catherine is very sweet and trusting and believes the best of people, believes everyone can be restored at the beginning of the story, and Jonathan is a bit more hardened and has experience of life. The only thing I wasn't so much a fan of is that Catherine and Jonathan have a kind of will they, won't they romance all the way through the book, and there were times when I felt like that was being extended, the sort of tension in that was being extended deliberately just to keep it going throughout the whole book, and it just felt a little bit unnatural. Some of the decisions they made, some things that happened, I just felt like were out of character for them. Maybe were just put there to keep the tension going throughout the book. So that was the only thing that I didn't like. But everything else I really loved in this book. So I would give it 8.5 out of 10 for story enjoyment rating and a 2 out of 3 for Christian faith rating. Another book that I completed was Sherlock Holmes' escape book, The Adventure of the Tower of London. This is like a kind of puzzle book, kind of story mixture, and there are different numbered pages, and you're kind of jumping backwards and forwards, and you have to work out puzzles to work out which page to go to next, and sometimes you have to sort of choose choose your own adventure in there. The puzzles, I found some of them were so difficult that even when I looked up the answers at the back, I was like, I don't understand how I would possibly have known that. Some of them I got. And then the story was okay, it was a bit meh. So yeah, I gave it 3 stars. Yeah, it's quite nice as a novelty gift, but as a book to buy for yourself, I'm not sure about. I've finished reading Dear Henry, Love Edith by Becca Kinzer. This is a contemporary romance. It's a bit of a rom-com, and it's following Edith, who wants to go to South Africa, but her passport hasn't come through, and so she takes a volunteer job at a crisis centre over the summer, I think it is. But the person that she was going to stay with, her house needs to be something done to it, and so she has to go stay with this person's uncle, who is Henry. And Henry is persuaded to let out his house while he's having physiotherapy. He's staying downstairs and let this lady, who he thinks is an older lady, live upstairs. Edith is a widow, and so Henry thinks she's much older than she is. Edith thinks Henry is an older man. They don't meet because they're working like night shifts, day shifts, and they keep sort of missing each other each time. So they start writing notes to each other. As I said, this is contemporary romance. It's obviously about the two characters. It's also a comedy, so there's a lot of awkward situations, times when I sort of cringed for the characters because of the embarrassing situations that sort of just keep on happening. The main characters I felt like had quite a good depth to them. They felt like pretty real people, but quite a lot of the side characters, the people that live in this sort of small town, are almost stereotypical, almost like caricatures of themselves, a little bit eccentric, let's put it that way. There's a lot of misunderstandings. There are some choices which the main characters make which I wouldn't recommend to a Christian to make. I wouldn't necessarily have agreed with, but there is some consequences to some of those decisions. Some of them didn't have consequences too, so I wasn't so happy about that. But yeah, it was fun. It was cute. The plot was a little bit messy at times, a little bit haphazard, sort of going from thing to thing. It was definitely fun though. In terms of Christian fiction, I thought most of the way through this is just reading like a clean fiction, but there was some faith content towards the end, and that was good, so I appreciated that bit. I would have liked to see just a little bit more through the main part of the book, but yeah, it kind of reads as clean fiction up until that point, really. Just a couple of mentions of that they go to church, but there was some further on. So overall, I would give it 4 stars. I give it 8 out of 10 for story enjoyment rating, and maybe a 1.5 out of 3 for Christian faith rating, bearing in mind that most of that was happening near the end of the book. Oh, and I forgot to mention that I found it on the Audible Plus catalogue, so if you have an Audible subscription, you may still be able to listen to it for free. I finished reading and listening to Enhanced by Candace Kade. I had a very mixed reaction to this book. So first of all, what it's about, it's following a character called Urban. She lives in China in, I think it might be 100 years time. It's in the sort of near future time, and they have developed genetic enhancements in their society. So people with enough money can have their embryos genetically enhanced before they're born into people. And so there are people who are naturals who don't have any enhancements, and then they are enhanced, and there's all sorts of different ways you can be enhanced. You can fly, you can go underwater, you can have intelligence, you can have beauty, and all sorts of things. It's kind of like a superhero culture whereby the rich elite all have these superpowers and the people in the bottom strata don't have anything and are sort of in the lower jobs. Then it's kind of like Chinese society now, so it's everyone has a social score and they have to keep their credits up by doing certain things to keep in with the elites. And if they fail to do that, they can fall out the bottom society and not be able to even travel or do things, barely able to eat. So everybody wants to keep a good social, at least all the people in Urban's family do. She has been adopted into this family, and it turns out that she's actually a natural. She's in an enhanced family, and so she's trying to fake being enhanced when she's actually not. She goes to university, and it's all really difficult for her to try and keep this facade up. At the university there are games they can take part in, different classes and stuff, and yeah. So as a story-wise, I enjoyed a lot of things about this book. I liked the characters and the plot and the mystery and the suspense and all the different world creativity parts of the world and the plot of the story. It was just, was very interesting. But content-wise, this was given a category of Christian fiction on Amazon. There is no Christian content in this book at all. So I was kind of disappointed about that. I would say the content is mostly clean. There's not any sex there. There's no outright swearing. I think Lindsay from BFCG has got a spoiler review on her Goodreads page where she goes into all the different cuss words and things that might be there, which I kind of glossed over a bit myself. The thing that stood out to me, the main character does practice jiu-jitsu, and that's talked about quite a lot. So martial arts. It kind of gave me the impression that the author and the characters had a kind of spiritual side to them, but there was nothing to indicate that it was Christian to me. Depends on what your view is on Christians doing martial arts, but it's not something that I would probably be involved in. So I'm going to give this a -1 out of 3 problematic, flagging up for problematic as a Christian faith rating, and 7 out of 10 maybe for story enjoyment rating. It would have been higher, but for the jiu-jitsu kind of sent me on I was spending a lot of time thinking about, is this going to go new agey, is this okay with God? I don't know, which took away from the enjoyment of the story for me. So I'm going to round it down on Goodreads to 3 stars. I don't know if I'm going to continue with this. I would kind of part of me would like to know what happens in the story, but then part of me thinks I've got other books with Christian content in that I would like to get to read. So will I read it? I'm not sure about that at this particular point in time. So I've read the first novella in this bind up of 3 contemporary romance novellas, and the collection is called Toss the Bouquet. The novella is called All Dressed Up in Love by Ruth, Logan, Herne, and it is about a story about Tara, who walks into a bridal shop to get a job because she is training to become a lawyer, but she's running out of money. So she goes to this bridal shop to try and get a job. The boss there is very attractive, and he is also a lawyer. He is trying to save the business because it belonged to his late mother. I thought it was cute, it was sweet, and it did have some Christian faith content in there as well. The story is pretty short. They fitted in quite a few different characters and the story, but it did make the story feel a bit rushed for me, particularly the romance and the character development and the spiritual development. I think that probably could have extended into a whole novel length, but it was fitting into a novella, so it did feel a little bit rushed at times, but it was a nice, sweet romance story to fit in between other books. So I give it 8 out of 10 for story enjoyment rating and 3 out of 3 for Christian faith rating. I finished reading A Lady's Guide to Marbles and Misadventure by Angela Bell. This is Christian historical fiction romance, and it is following Clara, whose ex-fiance is not happy about her breaking off their engagement, and so he starts spreading rumours about her family being mad and threatening to get them put into an asylum, and she is trying to avoid him and trying to avoid getting involved with him, and whilst at the same time trying to keep her family out of mischief because they are quite eccentric. Then her grandfather, who owns like a clockwork kind of shop, takes on an apprentice who has a leg missing, and he gives him a mechanical leg, which causes Clara to be afraid that he's actually a spy for her ex-fiancé, and so she doesn't take to him at all. She doesn't want him anywhere in the house. Both characters, Clara and the apprentice, are both quite broken people, and out of their brokenness they end up sort of reacting to other people. Clara is very reactionary. She goes on the offensive and sort of literally attacks sometimes the people and hurts other people, and Theodore is the apprentice. He tends to withdraw into himself, doesn't want anybody close to him. Clara is constantly feeling like she is responsible for her family all the time, and so yeah, that's how the story begins, and then her grandfather disappears. So he goes off in his flying owl machine. He's like a great inventor. I've heard this story described as steampunk. I wouldn't describe it as that. I would say it just has eccentric characters in it, and part of that is her grandfather is a very clever inventor and invents things made from clockwork. So automatons, so kind of like robots, but supposedly made from just clockwork pieces. It kind of gives them a feeling of them being magical, but they're not meant to be magical. They're meant to be just very, very clever. If you've ever seen the Nutcracker in the Four Realms, that film, her grandfather's name is Drosselmeyer, her name is Clara. At the beginning of that film, Clara goes to see her godfather Drosselmeyer in his laboratory, where he's got these inventions that are made of clockwork, and he also has an owl that follows Clara around and stuff. So I can see like inspirations from that. I can also see inspirations from like 80 Days Around the World, in a way, the sort of travelling themes in that sort of Victorian period. So her grandfather goes off in his flying owl machine and leaves her clues to follow after him, and she feels like she has to follow after him to make sure that he's safe and not going to get sort of arrested and put in an asylum. So on the outside of this book is very sort of quirky adventure set in the Victorian type of period. London 1860 is when it starts. It was fun, it was amusing, there was a lot of travelling around. I would have liked to seen a little bit more distinction between the different places where they travelled in Europe, just a bit more in the description to give me a more solidified distinctions between places. Sometimes it just sort of felt quite similar to each other, and actually Europe is very varied between different countries and different places. So just a little bit more of that. I would have liked character-wise, this is really a redemption story for both the characters. So there's a lot of faith as the book progresses in this, Christian faith, which is one of the things I really loved about it. They both have like good redemption stories along with their faith, as well as their sort of what they're going through as people. And actually, as they get, as the story progresses, there were some moments where faith like really made an impact, and it choked me up like twice, because there's one for her and one for him, and I really loved those bits of it. So at the beginning of the story, because it's like a redemption story, the characters have some really unlikable parts to them. So they are pushing each other away. She's like physically fighting and being rude to people. Definitely, they're enemies to lovers. By the end of the story, I really had grown to warm to the characters and like them. They've changed quite a lot. Even the mother, who I found quite irritating at the beginning, I'd sort of warmed to her by the end. So I would say the faith content in this was one of my favourite things about it. The quirkiness of it I also loved, and I loved the romance and the progression of having to change and trust people and open up again. That was really fantastic. In terms of story enjoyment rating, I would give this 8.5 out of 10, and a 3 out of 3 for Christian faith rating. I'll give it a good solid 4 stars. I've been reading or listening to Mandy and the Secret Tunnel by Lois, Gladys, Leppard, and this is a fairly old now, I think, middle grade Christian book. It is following Mandy, who, following the death of her father, she finds her mother really doesn't like her very much, and so she's sort of sent away to work as a servant in a house. They don't like her very much, and so she is connected with her Uncle Ned, who is Native American, and he is helping her. He helps her to escape, and she goes to try and find her other uncle. Straight away, I'll say I don't know much about Native American culture. and history, so I don't know if the representation in this would be considered to be good or bad or anything in between. So yeah, I can't really comment too much about that, but that might be something, that might be an issue for some people. Yeah, I kind of enjoyed the story. Emotionally, it was quite interesting seeing her as a character and different little friends and things. That did seem a little bit disjointed at times, and considering the title is like about a secret tunnel, there wasn't a huge amount to do with that, and it didn't have a huge sort of thing on the play in the book. It was interesting. Christian faith wise, there is some Christian faith in this. I felt like there was a preacher at the beginning who was quite severe and would put a child off going to church if that's what they thought it would be like. And I felt like the Christian elements was almost promoting the idea that if you're good and if you behave well, then you will be saved through that. And there wasn't enough about being saved through Jesus and his death and resurrection. So I will give this one a 6 out of 10 for story enjoyment, and 2 out of 3, but also -1 for Christian faith rating. So there is faith content in there, but I'll give it also a -1 for the faith content possibly leading people astray in terms of faith. Yeah, so I don't know if I'll continue with this series. Interested to know if this was like one of your favourites as a child. I don't know that many Christian middle grade books, so any recommendations for that, leave them down in the comments. Finished reading Lady of the Skies by Melanie Dickerson. This is one of the Derricott tales. This is a young adult Christian historical fiction and set in the medieval times. It is also a retelling or reimagining of Jack and the Beanstalk. It is following Louisa, who has her father's died, and her sister have been taken in by her uncle, and he is sort of taken over their finances, and he wants to basically kind of sell them off to the highest bidder as wives. Her sister is only 12, and Louisa really doesn't want to marry the people that her uncle wants her to marry, and just keeps trying to sabotage every kind of engagement prospect. In the end, when he starts threatening to marry her sister off, she decides to go in search of this treasure that she's heard of in Yorkshire. And she sort of heard that it's guarded by a giant, so she goes off, disguised herself as a boy, cuts her hair, and goes off on this quest to find this treasure. On the way, she meets Charles, who is a knight who's been jilted by a woman and is left the castle that he was with, and so he decides to protect her as they are journeying. They meet quite a lot of different people on the way and have a lot of adventures. I enjoyed this one a bit more than the last one, I think. This one has more action in it, and I am finding that I like Melanie Dickerson's when she talks about how she describes the action, more than I like the romance. So there was still some cheesy parts to the romance for me in the book, but there was more action in it, so I enjoyed it more. I would give it 8 out of 10 for story enjoyment. Her sort of style of writing is, it's young adult, so it's for teenagers. I would say it's slightly more simplistic in a way because it's aimed at younger readers. It does have, content-wise, it does have descriptions of violence and descriptions of kissing. There is some faith content in there, so I would give it 2 out of 3 for Christian faith rating. I enjoyed the way that she reimagined the Jack and the Beanstalk story, something I'm quite familiar with, and she sort of reimagined it in a way to fit it with the story, and I really enjoyed that part of it. So those are the books that I've read recently. Let me know in the comments the favourite book and maybe even the least favourite book that you've read recently if you want to. Let's have a chat about the books in the comments below or over on the blog. If you would like to see any more videos about Christian fiction, you can watch these videos over here. I hope you're having a really great week. I pray God bless you this week, and until next time, Bye!